Hello, my name is Eliza, and on this channel I talk about different aspects of psychology, mental health, relationships, and the human psyche. Welcome. This video is about social anxiety, a condition that is familiar to many of us. So what is social anxiety? Why do we fear social interactions, even though we need them, and what can we do about it? Let's get started looking for answers. First, let's define a little bit what anxiety is. Anxiety is a state in which a person experiences emotional and often physical discomfort, anticipating impending trouble or threat. Fear, unlike anxiety, is focused on a clear and specific threat in the present moment, while anxiety is directed at a diffuse and vague threat, and it can be very long-lasting. For example, we may fear a wolf when we see one in the forest, but we may feel anxious when we start wondering, is there a wolf in this forest? In this room? What if it attacks us suddenly and we're not ready? What if it's not a wolf, but something or somebody else? What if? So the connection between fear and threat is direct. We are afraid of the wolf, while the connection between anxiety and threat is hidden or unclear. We are not sure what the threat is. Anxiety can be adaptive and very useful, despite the fact that it feels very uncomfortable. Well, it's supposed to feel uncomfortable to motivate us to scan the environment and take action to prevent the threat. It's one of our survival mechanisms, and it works as negative reinforcement, but I'll talk about that in more detail later in this video. Apparently, anxiety helps us look into the future. It's like a time machine trying to predict what threats we may face. Anxiety also occurs when we lack information about the environment, so it allows us to be on the alert, just in case. So what happens in our body and our mind when we're anxious? There are quite a few complex processes going on in the body to prepare us for the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses. Here are some of them. Our heart rate increases to better pump blood to our muscles and brain. The frequency and intensity of breathing also increase in order to get more oxygen, which can nourish the cells of our body. We start sweating intensely to regulate our bodily processes and stabilize our body temperature. Anxiety causes muscles to contract, and it naturally leads to muscle tension, preparing us to use our resources to fight, defend, flee, or freeze. Okay, and what happens to our mind and our thinking? Initially, various structures of the brain process information that is perceived by our sensory systems, and then these brain structures signal to our body that some kind of threat is possible. Therefore, it is considered that our thoughts, beliefs, and perceptions come first, and then the body reacts, and anxiety occurs. In other words, our mind and perception can produce anxiety, but this happens instantly, almost simultaneously with the body processes. And then, under the influence of anxiety, our way of thinking at the moment also changes. And here's how. Our thought processes speed up. That's why we start to have racing thoughts. At the same time, our thinking narrows and becomes tunnel-like. We start focusing on the dangers and stop thinking about anything else. Other things become less important because at this point, the main task for our body and our mind is to cope with a possible threat. In that way, anxiety keeps us alert and concentrated. So, our body and brain do those things to protect us from threats, and these processes are normal. But of course, the intensity of anxiety can exceed the adaptive level, which can become a real problem and even a disorder that worsens a person's life. Severe physical and mental symptoms of anxiety can prevent constructive coping. A person may suffer from physical symptoms associated with intense heartbeat, shortness of breath, dizziness, nausea, panic attacks, and some others. The mind becomes restless. Racing thoughts can start going into loops and produce more thoughts about potential threats, which increases anxiety even more. There are many reasons why anxiety can become maladaptive and destructive for us. These include the biological, psychological, social causes, and traumatic experiences. Later in this video, I will talk about how to deal with anxiety, including social anxiety, and how to befriend the signals that anxiety gives us. However, if you notice severe anxiety symptoms that are immensely interfering with your ability to live a full life, do not delay seeking help. You deserve to live a life where anxiety guides you, not destroys you. And now it's time to talk about social anxiety. Well, the very name of social anxiety indicates that it occurs in social situations. But it may not be only anxiety, but even a fear of certain social interactions. Social anxiety can range in intensity from shyness to severe social anxiety disorder and social phobia. Some level of social anxiety is common to many people. But why do we experience it? Just like anxiety in general, social anxiety exists for a reason. The evolutionary approach emphasizes the adaptive and regulatory function of social anxiety that has developed throughout human history. We survived in a group of people, and rejection by a certain group could lead to bad consequences and low chances of survival. Social anxiety is supposed to protect from rejection, loss of status within a group, and maintain the hierarchy of a social group. A certain system or hierarchy of society allows to reduce competition and tension and restrain aggression over resources and mating partners. Social anxiety also signals threats within a group, even if they are overestimated. Therefore, social anxiety, according to the evolutionary approach, helps people model their behavior within a group. This is why the fear of rejection and criticism is at the core of social anxiety. But of course, not all rejection and criticism lead to exile and death, especially nowadays. There are also other theories explaining the causes of social anxiety. But still, why does one person experience only mild shyness, while another may suffer from a severe disorder? What makes us fear being judged, even for small mistakes in a social group, and why? Naturally, there is more than one answer to these questions. Genetics and biology play a big role in our predisposition to high or low levels of anxiety. Some people are born with a higher susceptibility to anxiety, and that's okay to some extent, because we're all different, and this diversity helps us find different ways to adapt and live. The intensity of anxiety can also be affected by various conditions of the body, such as illnesses, stress, exhaustion, and many other reasons. But we're not going to talk much about biological aspects in this video. In fact, social environment plays a key role in whether social anxiety will occur or not. From a psychological perspective, social anxiety indicates that something has disrupted or undermined the basic sense of trust and emotional safety in relationships. If a person has been harshly criticized, judged, bullied, or even abused, especially in childhood, then the risk of developing social anxiety increases significantly. Some experiences in relationships may have been so humiliating and painful that the psyche couldn't cope with them effectively. Therefore, a person doesn't want to repeat them again in interactions with other people, so social anxiety arises, warning about a possible experience that might be similar to the past event. And thus, social anxiety signals a threat, not so much to our body, but to our personality and self-esteem. According to cognitive psychology, negative past experiences shape negative thoughts and beliefs about oneself. And people with social anxiety, sometimes even unconsciously, fear that others will expose them and confirm their negative self-image. In other words, they expect to be criticized and rejected, just like they were criticized and rejected in the past. Here are some examples of thoughts that can trigger anxiety in social situations. People will think I'm boring, or ugly, or weird, or stupid. I should never show that I'm worried, or people won't like me. I'll be rejected because there's something fundamentally wrong with me. We are often unaware of these thoughts and don't notice them. They come and go very quickly in different forms and even images. And it really hurts to think that way about ourselves. Before I continue, I would like to say that if you have similar thoughts, then I can assure you that this is not true about you. It may be hard to believe, but these thoughts and beliefs do not reflect the real picture of you, other people, or the world. You are so much bigger and better than your negative self-image dictates. I think it would be useful and great to keep that in mind. Okay, and let's get back to social anxiety. The thing is, social anxiety tries to anticipate the experience in which we might feel that pain of rejection and criticism. Remember our natural time machine? But it could start to mess up a bit, especially when we had some negative experience. We start to criticize ourselves, but at the same time we're afraid that others will confirm our thoughts. Anxiety itself is also an unpleasant state for us. Remember, I mentioned negative reinforcement. This is when some unpleasant stimulus is given until we do something to improve our situation. For example, a simple alarm clock. When we sleep, we don't like the sound of it, so we want to turn it off as soon as possible, so that we can sleep a little longer. Well, actually, so that we can get up. An alarm clock is an unpleasant stimulus when we sleep. Anxiety works in a similar way. We need to do something or stop doing something or react in some way to improve our situation so that we don't feel anxious. People cope with social anxiety in different ways. It's very similar to the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses. And it can be difficult to find the right way to improve our situation because remember, we don't know exactly what the threat is when we experience anxiety, including social anxiety. A common behavior for people with high levels of social anxiety is avoidance behavior. People start to avoid social interactions. Sometimes it can help, it reduces anxiety for a while and it can be adaptive, but unfortunately, very often in the long run, avoidance increases the symptoms of social anxiety. If we avoid it, then to our brain and body it means that there really was something dangerous there and we couldn't handle it, so we must continue to avoid it. We reinforce that idea with our behavior. Social anxiety increases and we start to avoid even more. Eventually, a person is deprived of social interactions. But people don't always choose the avoidance strategy. Another way to cope with social anxiety is safety behavior. It means that people put themselves in a social situation, but at the same time do something that is supposed to reduce their perceived threat. For example, people can try to hide their flaws using makeup or special clothes, or they can over-rehearse upcoming social interactions and prepare a lot for social events. Well, it seems like a good way to cope with social anxiety, but in reality, safety behavior may be excessive and could actually reinforce negative beliefs. In fact, people can have excellent social skills and still experience social anxiety because they believe that deep down there is something wrong with them and they should hide it to avoid rejection and criticism. There is one more strategy I want to talk about. It's not that obvious, but people can deal with social anxiety by being aggressive and bullying other people. By overly criticizing others, people can cope with their feelings of inferiority and fear of rejection. They choose a fight strategy to prevent themselves from being vulnerable and feeling that intense pain of inadequacy which comes from their beliefs. They try to replenish their self-esteem at the expense of others. And after all, people who abuse have also been abused. In fact, all types of coping behavior can be adaptive and helpful to some extent, but they become maladaptive when they start to take us away from this important goal: sincere, authentic, fulfilling, and quality communication with other people. We don't feel anxious about things that don't matter to us. It's just the opposite. Anxiety tells us about something very important to us. People with social anxiety actually have a strong need for acceptance. They are not afraid of socialization. They fear rejection. They desire to be a part of a social group where their true self can be loved and accepted. And I have one interesting fact for you. Do you know what oxytocin is? It's the so-called love hormone and neuropeptide. It plays a significant role in our social openness, empathy, deep social connections, including parenting, romantic relationships, and friendships. It is involved in creating a feeling of belonging. However, there are studies that also indicate that oxytocin is produced during times of stress and anxiety. For example, in some studies, people with higher social anxiety symptoms had increased plasma oxytocin levels. According to the results of the study, there was a hypothesis that increased oxytocin secretion was an insufficient compensatory attempt of the body, which was supposed to reduce symptoms of anxiety. Moreover, if oxytocin is produced in the parts of the brain responsible for stress, then it can increase social anxiety, causing distrust of other people. But on the other hand, oxytocin is also considered to have anxiolytic effects, meaning that it can reduce anxiety. It also encourages us to seek social connections and cope with stress through safe and secure relationships. To put it simply, oxytocin can either increase or decrease anxiety depending on which part of the brain it is produced in. And I find it very interesting that oxytocin is involved in both seeking and enjoying social interactions, as well as distrusting others. And I believe that this is where the answer to the question of how to deal with social anxiety lies. People with social anxiety will experience less distress if they find themselves in secure relationships where they can feel accepted and safe. Sounds simple, right? But of course, putting it into practice is not always that simple. One of the most effective ways to reduce your social anxiety, heal your wounds, and change your self-image is to go to therapy. In some cases, it's better to seek medical help. But in this video, I also give you some tips which can help you get closer to your goals of creating healthy relationships and enjoying social interactions. Firstly, let's talk about ways which can help you deal with anxiety in general. We can't get rid of the feeling of anxiety, but we don't even have to. Anxiety gives us important signals, and we can learn how to use them effectively. And then the anxiety will naturally decrease. There are two things I would like to emphasize. The first one, anxiety is information. Treat everything that anxiety gives you as information that is not always true. Don't believe all the predictions of anxiety. However, try to understand the value behind anxiety. What does your anxiety want to say to you? Maybe you need to take care of yourself. Maybe you need to pay attention to some aspects of your life, or to your family and friends. Listen to your body. What does your body want at this moment? Listen to your mind. How realistic are your anxious thoughts? Gather information, but don't believe everything your anxious thoughts tell you. The second one, take action. Figure out what you can do that will benefit you and improve the situation and your condition in the moment. What can you control? What can't you control? Can you take a moment to breathe, meditate, drink a glass of water? Can you wash your face with cold water? Can you talk to somebody? And try to make decisions not based on your anxious thoughts, but based on the value that anxiety points to. And even the smallest act of self-care will help you build confidence that you can handle it. Now let's move on to some tips that can help you deal with social anxiety. The first one, know your value. It is very important. Remember that no one and nothing can take away your value from you. No matter what others say or do, no matter what you say or do, your right to value and worth is given you at birth, as is given to all people and living beings. Try to remind yourself of this idea every day, every time you experience social anxiety or fear that other people might reject you or criticize you. This reminder will help you develop tolerance for rejection and criticism. Write it down, repeat it as an affirmation until you believe it. The second one, accept rejection as a part of the human experience. Rejection and criticism are inevitable, and everyone experiences them. However, when you know in your heart that no rejection will take away your value, it will feel less painful. You don't have to avoid it, but you don't have to intentionally expose yourself to rejection either. The third one, we all have the right to choose. People may not choose you, but you can also walk away from a group of people who don't meet your values. Ask yourself these questions. Am I afraid of rejection and criticism from these particular people? And if they really do criticize me harshly and treat me badly on a regular basis, would I want to continue to associate with them? There are a lot of people in this world, and you can find people who can love and accept the authentic you. Actually, a lot of people experience social anxiety at some point in their lives, and many of them show understanding and compassion for people with social anxiety. The last one, take small steps. To build healthy relationships with others, it is important to engage in social interactions. But you don't need to start with the situation that scares you the most. Try ranking which situations make you the most anxious and the least anxious, and start taking small steps. Little by little, you will show your brain and body that this is not so dangerous and even pleasant to communicate with other people. Praise yourself for every small step and treat yourself with kindness and compassion. This process may take some time, and it's better to have someone to accompany you along the way. But I believe that if you're willing to befriend your anxiety and start enjoying social interactions, you will eventually succeed. It's not bad to be anxious from time to time. Nothing is wrong with you if you have social anxiety. You may need some help if your anxiety is severe, but that only means that you need more compassion and care. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. Share your thoughts in the comments, as well as your tips and experiences of how you cope with anxiety. I'd really love to read them. Take care and see you next time.